And good evening and welcome to OTF Connects. Tonight we're going to talk about play-based problem solving in the primary classroom with a wonderful huge group of 45 we have so far from right across the province of Ontario. And we're very happy to have one of our favorite and experienced OTF Connects presenters, Mary Kay Goindy, tonight, who's going to be talking to her friends about play-based problem solving in primary. So Mary Kay, I'm really happy to moderate. I'm going to take a back seat now and let you get started.
Thanks so much, Susan. Hey, everybody. Just a couple things to start. If you have a Twitter handle, if you could type it in the chat right now, because the best thing for this night might not be anything I say. It might be connecting with another educator, and you will have an ongoing conversation with them that may start tonight and go on for years. So if you've got a Twitter handle, put it in, and then maybe if you're connecting with somebody and their comments, you could go back in the file and find their Twitter handle and continue that conversation. As well, I've had some participants say they felt rude typing in the chat if they were typing something else that I wasn't explicitly discussing at the time. Please don't feel rude. This is your learning. I get that you might learn from me, you might learn from somebody else, everything like that. Just know that I get pretty overwhelmed and I don't always see questions in the chat. So put your hand up if there's a good question in the chat that I maybe missed, because it does scroll by fairly quickly on my screen. Anybody want to say anything before I go on? You might want to clear your polling tool. So I see that we still have 18 yeses and 14 nos. Maybe you want to go in. Oh, they're all gone. Thanks, Susan. Or everybody did it at exactly the same time. So that's me. That's my Twitter handle. I was going to introduce myself formally, but I think you'll probably get to know me as I go on. The other thing, this is something I believe has to happen for learning to occur. So that includes when I'm working with young students, and it also works when I'm presenting and facilitating these OTF Connect sessions. So I am hoping that I say something that somewhat upsets you or puts you in cognitive dissonance where you have to go, what? And either it will challenge your beliefs and make you hold on more tightly to what you already believe, or maybe it will help shift you to a slightly new belief. So if I make you feel uncomfortable, I kind of want to, but feel free to say when you're feeling uncomfortable, and we can have a discussion about that. So what happened to me last year was, for the past 23 years, more or less, I'd been an intermediate teacher. And on the end of the first week, we found out that our school was going to undergo reorganization, and we were losing an intermediate classroom, and we were gaining an FDK classroom. And the principal said, well, I'll have to move an intermediate teacher to junior, and a junior to primary, and a primary to FDK. And then I flippantly said, or just move the intermediate teacher to FDK, and I kept walking down the hall. Well, I got a phone call that night, should keep my mouth closed, and I was asked to teach the FDK class. So I thought, okay, I mean, I cried a little bit because it was scary for me. I won't pretend it wasn't. And I went into the FDK class on the first day, and I did something like this, where I had made worksheets where they had to print their names, and I was just going to get started, you know, with something like this. Well, I had 15 students in my class, so I had no ECE, and 3 of my senior kindergartens and 1 of my junior kindergarten students did this beautifully. 5 of the other students still worked on the paper, but they drew pictures. 4 of the students completely left the tables and just started going to the blocks and to other things in the classroom. And 2 students became so anxious they ran around and dumped every single bin they could get their little hands on before. So I'm running around the classroom chasing the dumpers, and it was not a stellar start to my education in FDK. And so driving home, I was really upset because I thought, what have I done? You know, I've left intermediate where I was very comfortable, and now I'm an FDK teacher. But then I started to kind of think about the day, and I didn't do my best teaching. I knew better. I knew I shouldn't have had paper involved in the first day, but I didn't do better because what I did was I defaulted to how I was taught. And even though I know things are different, my default was to go back to an activity like this that I am sure I did when I was in kindergarten myself. So I was frustrated, the kids were frustrated, and here's maybe the first thing. I will say that my biggest mistake that day was involving paper, because I think that paper is the death of learning for primary students. I don't think students in the primary division learn when there's paper involved. Doesn't mean there should never be paper, but I'm not sure that that's when the learning really happens. And a lot of that is because of something I've done quite a bit of reading, and it's called cognitive load. And basically what it says is that you have so much energy and power to kind of send to your learning. And I think I overloaded those primary students because while I was thinking they would just be practicing their printing, they were practicing holding a pencil, sitting in a chair, you know, staying on task and all these other things. So they had limited resources to put to all those new learning. Really, that task was only appropriate for 4 students, and probably only 2 of the students because the other two students could print beautifully. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that paper shouldn't be, like this whole worksheet thing. I now avoid paper with all primary students. I might save it for the end of the unit, and of course in primary maybe more in grade 3 and very, very little in grade 1. Any comments to that? And here's the thing, maybe you gave a primary student a worksheet today and you're kind of thinking, I did that, and that might be your first bit of cognitive dissonance today. Anybody want to grab the mic? Comment? Blank spaces, absolutely, Crystal. Blank papers at the end, that's how I get my final assessments most often. Thank you, Sarah, for the EQAO comment. I agree that we need to have students learn how to record their thinking on paper, but I will say that that comes at the end of their learning of the new concept. And too many times we expect students to both learn the new concept and learn how to record it on paper at the same time, and that is, I believe, too much for most of the students that I work with. And maybe you agree with that. It is a huge mind shift. It's a big change in practice, absolutely. But I think that our education system needs some of us to be really brave and to be kind of maverick and do things differently than the way they've been done. Because if we keep doing it as we've been doing, we're going to get the same results. And we know that we're not always happy with what we're providing to our students. And we know that some of our students struggle when they're in our class and when they're going forward beyond our class. So I think it's a calling for us to be brave and to try different. Melissa's comment about the parents. I agree, we have a lot of educating to do. We have to educate our colleagues who may not feel the same yet, our administrators who might want to see one thing and we're doing something else in our classroom, our parents who love their children and want the very best for their children. They don't intend to make our life challenging, but they want to advocate for their child. I agree, there's a whole lot of educating to be done, but I think we can do it. Absolutely. Sarah, I think I'm going to come back to your notion of proof of assessments later, if that's okay. And was there any other comment there? Because these are great comments, but I lose track. Did anybody want to grab the mic? No, I heard that no whisper. Okay, so that's one thing I think about was that cognitive load, and I overload them. The other thing I was thinking about was a monograph, and it was called Learning Math versus Following the Rules, and it was put out by the ministry in 2007, so it's a little dated now. But basically it's a story, and it was by a man named Paul Cobb, and he was researching. He was researching how grade 2s attacked problems. And so he met a bunch of grade 2 students, I'm going to say about 100, I can't remember the exact number, and he asked them, if you had 16 cookies and somebody brought you 9 more cookies, how many cookies would you have? And 100% of the students were able to tell him that they would now have 25 cookies. So he walked away thinking, great, these grade 2s can add. There's even a little bit of regrouping in this situation, but 100% got it correct. And then so he went back a couple weeks later, and he gave them the addition question, traditionally lined up vertically, 16 plus 9, and only half of them, roughly half of them got it correct. So he's thinking, my goodness, what's gone on? These were the same kids that answered this addition question correctly 2 weeks ago, and now they're not answering it properly. And in his interviews, one little child, I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl, said, well, if I was at home in my kitchen and Mom and I were counting cookies, 16 cookies plus 9 cookies will always be 25. But in school, it will always be 115. Two things bothered me with that. First of all, the whole notion that the kids think that what happens in school isn't the same as what happens out in the real world, and vice versa. It's a little bit alarming, having spent so much time in schools, to think that the students in my class maybe thought that what I was working on them with was only going to be good in our classroom, and then it disappeared once they walked outside those walls. But it kind of goes back to the cognitive load piece, and I wonder when primary students are working in math, it's not that they don't understand the concept, but they don't understand school. And they think it's a series of rules, and there's no place for their own common sense in school, is what I'm thinking some students believe, and just that general disconnect. It's kind of also a symptom of compliance, where the students felt like they had to do that traditional algorithm, but they didn't really understand what that regrouping meant. But using the algorithm and trying to get the right answer just trumped their common sense or their showing of understanding. So that's the other piece that I was thinking about. And then I knew this, oh sorry, I should have put that slide up, this whole thing about play-based learning in FDK. And so when I moved to FDK, I started searching. And this is one of the, I didn't have time to read a whole book because I was teaching kindergarten or FDK the next day. So I was looking for little short pieces to give me information, and this is a good summary, I find, and I know you can't read it on the slide, but Susan just posted the link there in the chat. It's just a nice summary of what play-based learning is about, kind of the philosophy behind it, and that it is the push in FDK classrooms. And it's definitely something that I followed. So, time for me to take a break. A breather, and I wonder if in this chart you could grab the text tool, and if everybody participates, it's going to get very full, so if you feel more comfortable typing in the chat, go ahead. Maybe talk about, in your understanding, what is play-based instruction and what isn't play-based instruction. So I'm going to turn my mic off. If somebody just wants to grab the mic and talk, go ahead. But text tool, what it means to you, what you know it's not, put it in the chat.
I believe it's student-led.
Awesome. Other ideas? Grab the mic if you'd like. Awesome ideas coming out. Awesome. I think the slowing has, typing has slowed down a bit, but keep going if you've got more ideas. I'll kind of start with what it isn't. It's not the play that happens at their house. It's not the only the play that happens at their house. It might look very similar to begin with, but the teacher plays a key role. Somebody typed, it's not a free-for-all. Absolutely. It's not everybody doing the same thing. There's involving stations, and it's not teacher-led, although the teacher's a huge piece of the puzzle. I love the ideas of what it is. It's using everyday objects. It's got choice. It's often loud. It can be outside. Wonderful. I used to take my kindergartens outside for the whole middle block last year. 100 minutes outside every day except for the days when there was lightning. So much learning. The term inquiry, probing, guiding questions, many options, exploration, kinesthetic, student-led, all these ideas are exactly what I think it is. The teacher's role is very different in a play-based instruction classroom, because instead of spending all your energy coming up with the tasks for students to complete, you're putting your energy to observe the students and recognize the demonstrations of learning that you see in front of your eyes, which means, and I think somebody typed it in the chat, Krista did, you have to know the curriculum and see how that connects to their interests, because you have to know the curriculum expectations so well that you recognize how they are demonstrating meeting that expectation, or at least approaching that expectation, even though it might be different how you would approach that as an adult, because the mind of a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old is very different than the mind of a 48-year-old. So you have to kind of, you know, think of it from their point of view. And it requires questioning. If you want to be an educator that believes in play-based instruction, it's the questioning skills that you have to get so good at. And my favorite question was, what made you say that, or what made you do that? Just a very simple question that I ask so many times every day, because I might watch a student put an arch on top of the tower, and I might think I know why they're doing that, but when I actually do ask them, it's something very different. So I can't assume as the educator. I have to ask and then go forward. I think that's a hand up, so grab the microphone. No, was I just hearing things? Sorry,
no, I think it probably went on and off. Sometimes people hit it by accident, and that's okay.
Okay. So I got pretty good at this in the kindergarten classroom. Did anybody else want to say something, though, about that? But after reading all these things on play-based instruction, I reflected, and when I was a curriculum leader and working with math, I had an example from that. I went into a grade 2 classroom, and the teacher didn't believe that students could learn about data management and graphing without having her demonstrating how to build a graph and how to take a survey and all these kinds of things. So her plan was to do very teacher-directed instruction and modeling, and then have the students follow. And I know we model a lot in language and a lot of other subject areas, but I think in play-based instruction and in problem solving, the modeling shouldn't happen up front. It happens later in the learning cycle. So she trusted me, and I trusted her, and I said, well, can we just run this as a little experiment? So I entered her classroom dressed up in my very best business suit with a little briefcase, and I walked in as a business person, and I told the boys and girls I was setting up an ice cream parlor, but I only had room for 5 flavors. And I asked them if they could find out which 5 flavors I should have. And they all said yes, and they divided themselves into business teams, and away I left, and they went on to ask, and they did all their data collection, and lo and behold, they went and collected data. Then I came back in the classroom the next day, and I looked at the data they'd collected. And some had used a class list and had asked every person their favorite flavor. So I had a class list with a favorite flavor beside. That was fine. Then some of the boys and girls had written down the flavors and then kept a tally beside. And then other students made a graph. And this is what they did naturally. So I think that's the value of play-based, because it gives kids a chance to bring what they know to the table right away. Then I was able to go in and talk about all the things I liked. Oh, I liked how you used the class list because you made sure you didn't miss anybody's voice in your survey. Everybody had a voice. But then I said, but now I see in this tally, I can see the information that I want really quickly because I can see which is the most popular flavor, and I did the same for the graph. So it was the tally and the graph that worked really well. Then I was able to talk to the kids, but I'm a little bit confused by what this graph might mean. I know it right now, but what if I come back in a week? I might not know. So then I left, and then they talked about adding titles and labels and using a ruler to keep it neat and everything. And I came back the next day, and they all had independently done quite, impressive bar graphs without any formal instruction from the teachers, both of us. And at that point, we built our anchor charts and success criteria. And they were so meaningful to the students because the students had done the thinking and the work before, and the feedback that they were able to receive from us was immediate and timely and purposeful because they had to apply it right away. So that was an example of play-based learning in a grade 2 class. I heard a ding. Okay. So the other topic then is play-based, and then there's problem solving. If you want to do the same thing for this, what do you know about teaching math especially, but any subject really, through problem solving? What it is and what it isn't. Okay, Clark, you're stealing my thunder. I've got a couple slides later on. So yes, we'll absolutely. Now I don't know much about it, but maybe somebody else in the room does. Transmissionist. That's an awesome word. I have never read or used that word, but it says exactly what I think. So thanks for that. Perfect. So somebody said that problem solving is not one answer. It could be one answer, but there may be different ways to get to that answer. Collaborative, multiple strategies. Multiple entry points, absolutely. That's if we do it well. Lots of talk. Thinking, imagine that. It seems obvious that it would require thinking, but I would think that there have probably been days in my math class that students were able to get through the whole class and be successful without having to really think. Before I started teaching through problem solving, I would think that they just rotely followed the procedure and got the right answer. It was maybe more a matter of compliance than actually thinking in class. Kind of breaks my heart, Melanie, that I didn't always require kids to be thinking. people get stressed out, I think, sometimes when we talk about problem solving because they think they have to come up with the perfect word problem. But I would say that a problem solving classroom, it's not always about the word problem. It might be a word problem. It might just be a challenge. It might be a, can you do this? You know, can you start on an open number line at 47 and get to 96 using 3 jumps? Can you start from 47 and get to 96 using 3 different jumps? I think that's a problem-solving approach without having a word problem or anything like that. I'm not disagreeing with anything that's coming up, so if you're seeing the same things I am and you're agreeing, I think it's time to go on. Did anybody want to grab the mic and make a comment about problem solving? So there's just a little clip now, and I think Susan will help us get through this. It's a little 5-minute clip. It's called The Math in Blocks. And it's a teacher who's kind of crossing between play-based and problem solving. And so, Susan, would you like them to just click the link and watch it on their own, or will you put it in the web?
I think it's probably best if they just click on that link right in the chat, and it will open up the YouTube video in a browser on your own computer. And when you come back to the room, use the green check mark to let us know that you're finished watching the video, and then Mary Kay can know when it's time to move on. How's that?
Awesome. Perfect. And if you want to start, if you have any comments or reflections on the video after the green check mark, feel free to type them. I'm going to mute myself till I see most green checks.
And if you have any trouble with it, just put a comment in the chat.
Awesome. So, as Susan thinks, and I agree, I think most people are done watching if you wanted to watch. All the comments that I was going to make have come out in the chat already, how simple a task it is, There's not a lot of teacher prep going on here in terms of collecting resources and thinking of the script, although she was very purposeful in the questions that she asked. And I think that we just have to give ourselves permission to learn those good questions by immersing ourselves in those situations. And the first time, couple times we do it, the first 10 times, maybe the first 100 times we do it, we won't get the perfect question. But then we'll start to figure out what is that question we ask to get the learning from students, and students will also learn how we ask questions. And so the conversations at this time of year in April will be really rich around tasks like this when they understand the questioning and we know the question to ask. What are the others doing? Well, I hope they're playing at a house center or building something else, or reading favorite books, or anything like that. We'll talk about engagement later on, but I find that when you run a problem-solving play-based classroom, the class management issues definitely decrease, at least in my experience. And I know some of our higher needs students make it more challenging, but I find in this type of classroom, their challenges, or the challenges that they throw up to us, actually decrease as well, because they are not stressed. They get to operate where they're at in a play-based classroom. So they're not feeling anxiety about not knowing the right thing in terms of what it is they want to be doing. Krista's point about wanting to make notes during, so you get to know what your next thing. There's nothing wrong with grabbing a notepad and grabbing some notes, or just putting an audio recorder beside. And you probably don't need to write everything down. In terms of my note-taking, I kind of go by and sorry for the language, but the holy shit. So every time something really makes me go, whoa, because it's really good or really challenging, that's what I write down. And everything else I figure is probably, right at the expectation that I have. So I don't have to spend time scribing everything. It's the ones at either extreme that I take down. Yeah, sorry, I know. I sometimes say a different word instead of the S one. But yeah, we got lots of maybe Google voice typing. Set that up right beside and it will transcribe, take a recording and put it in print, and you could just very quickly go through and take the words that you need to out of it. So any other comments right now about play-based or problem solving? I should have asked this earlier. Could you use the polling tool? How many of you would say that you have a play-based problem-solving classroom right now? Cool. I don't have a primary classroom either right now, Melanie. I've got grade 6s. And so if you're not a primary teacher, and even if you are, maybe you want to come back and on May 2nd, I think it is, I'm going to talk really specifically about how I set my math program up, the planning, the cross-curricular, how I spiral through, how I build growth mindset and all that. So that's May 2nd. If I can get any of you to come back, that would be great. Okay, thanks for that poll, if you want to clear that now, because I think we'll go on. Because I want to convince you that if you're not doing play-based problem solving already, I'd encourage you to try. And if you are, you're probably finding some challenges, and I want to convince you that it's worth holding on to that and keep refining. And to quote our Prime Minister, actually he maybe made the quote in 2015, but his line, because it's 2016, this is why our students need us to embrace a problem-solving and play-based classroom for all these reasons. And these are the 21st Century Competencies. There are some documents that come out about this now. All over the world, educators are starting to think about what is it that our students need as skills to be successful adults very quickly. And these, I believe, are the 8 C's. They happen to all have C's in them. that we need to build. And our traditional classrooms, kind of the industrial age classroom where classrooms produce widgets and all widgets are the same and all widgets were made using the same manufacturing process, no longer applies. We need to change what we're doing. The world has changed, so to have a classroom that mimics the classrooms we attended, I don't think does our students any justice. So I think it's time for us to change. I think we're probably late to the change, but we can't do anything about that now, but we have to go forward. And here's the document, and the ministry put it out recently. It's listed on the EduGain site, and Susan just posted the link in the chat. 21st Century Competencies. It's something not just that's happening all around the world. Our province and our Ministry of Education is seriously looking at this. So as you see at the top, it's Winter 2016. It's new, but this is definitely a ministry initiative. It's no longer okay to teach how we have been teaching. We have to teach so that we build these competencies for our students. And I'm sorry, I agree about the baby in the bathwater, and different students need different things. Ellen, did you want to grab the mic and expand on that idea? Or maybe somebody else wants to jump off Ellen's starting point? No, okay, that's fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I like that idea, and I just wanted to, you know, have maybe a little bit of a debate, because I'm almost ready to throw out the baby, that baby, with the bathwater. I really think we need drastic changes. You're right, you can absolutely mix in the play-based learning. And some of you maybe, oh, sorry, maybe, there, I moved my taskbar so I could see all of those words. Does anybody know where these words are from? These 4 phrases, I guess.
I believe
we didn't turn out too badly, but the world is going to be very different.
FDK curriculum to be implemented in September 2016.
You are right. These are the 4 frames of the new kindergarten program. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, for next year, you won't have a language box and a mathematics box and a science box on the kindergarten, the FDK report card or communication to parents. These are the 4 categories that FDK teachers will be reporting on. Now, under these overall expectations or subject areas or frames is what they're calling it, they have the overall and the specific expectations from the subject areas. But it is a very cross-curricular, really awesome change, I would think, to the FDK reporting. Yeah, I love it too. And the fact that the FDK report is changing, and the fact that our ministry is putting a lot of effort and energy into learning and thinking about the 21st century competencies, I'm wondering if it won't be that long till these are the subject boxes on the 1 to 8 report card, or some variation of these 21st century competencies. In fact, soon we'll be reporting on these rather than language and mathematics. And I think that the play-based approach and problem-solving approach fits in quite nicely with this. It's easier to write a report card comment on self-regulation and well-being in a play-based classroom for math, for language, for science, for everything. Well, I think grade 1 should be play-based too. I think that all of these things don't disappear in kindergarten, or in grade 1. And I think we can probably find all of these 4 frames in our learning skills and in our overall expectations. Usually the second overall expectation is about cooperating and collaborating and researching and innovation and creativity. So I don't think it's going to be a huge shift, but I think it's, you know, it might just be a mindset for teachers. It's definitely not a switch for the students. A lot of times the students want to carry that mindset forward, and it's the teacher who is a little bit reluctant to do that switch. Anybody want to grab the mic, talk, reflect on play-based problem solving in terms of these 21st century competencies or these new 4 frames? Ooh, SK1, what a neat mix. Awesome, Nancy. I'm glad you're trying to wrap your mind around this. This is that cognitive dissonance. And even if at the end of the night you think, no, I am not sure of that, I'm happy because you've wrestled with a new idea and you've held on maybe to your own beliefs. And I guess that's what I really love. I love when teachers teach with intention. They're picking a pedagogy, they're doing something very intentional in their class as opposed to just following along and teaching how they were taught or teaching how they taught last year because the students liked it or it was easy to get assessment data from it. I'm not sure that brings out our best teaching and does the best for students, but when teachers believe in something passionately and bring that intentionally to their classroom, even if it's a different style from me, I applaud that. I think that's fabulous. So this is Mr. Messy, for those of you that don't know, and this is the next reason that I think we need to approach our teaching through a play-based or problem solving. And the phrase I often use is teachers too often sanitize the learning for students. When we give them math problems, we make sure that there are no remainders or everything works out nice and easily. And all the triangles that we show the students are equilateral and the one vertex is always pointing up. And everything is just kind of too neat. And life is not like that. There are leftovers, there are remainders, and we have to learn to deal with them. And primary students can learn to deal with remainders. They can just say, well, and we're not going to deal with these, or you know, these are leftovers. We don't have to tie everything up neatly in nice little packages for students. Play-based is messy. They're at the house center and they're having a party for 6 and they only have 4 plates. Well, then they have to go and ask for 2 more. I mean, that's a reality that happens in life, and so it brings the realness and the how things don't work out perfectly into the classroom, and it builds that grit and the resilience and everything else that our students so desperately need and will need to become adults. You know, the thing, learning is messy and life is messy, and play-based just kind of brings that all into your classroom. Yeah, teaching is messy. So, well, my desk is messy, that's for sure. But yes, teaching is absolutely messy. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to let it be messy and to not beat ourselves up when it flops, and to give us permission to try new things and experiment. I don't know if any of you listened to Metro Morning on CBC on Tuesday. They had John Mighton and they were talking about math because, of course, the math is a big panic in the province now. And they were talking about, yeah, it's messy and we need teachers to innovate. We need teachers to innovate their teaching style so that students love math, because as soon as they hate math, it's such a predictor on future success academically and probably into their careers and their adulthood. So they mentioned specifically teachers need to let it be messy and to accept a few setbacks and bombed lessons and things like that, so that we can get to that really good stuff where kids love math and we break that math phobia that plagues you know, society today. I'm seeing all this chat going by, and I'm going to absolutely come back and reread this because I feel like I'm missing a lot of good stuff. Did anybody want to grab the mic and make a comment? No? Okay. Oh, that's somebody? Go for it.
Hi. So I'm kind of reading the sidelines and having the same kinds of thoughts where the ones that have more play-based instruction in grade 1 might struggle more once they get to grade 2. But if the curriculum is changing. I think teachers need to have more of a picture of what the play-based learning looks like in JK, SK versus what it might look like in grade 1, because the kids are maturing and would need different kinds of scenarios. And then there should still be a little bit in grade 2, but lessening it maybe? I don't know. This is me wrapping my mind around this.
Yeah, maybe lessening the kind of the house center and the store kind of play, but maybe not the play-based, like teacher comes in and role-playing, you know, you're doing this and you're giving them a challenge or something like that. So the play will change, of course. But I'll tell you, my 6s love the play-based stuff, my grade 6s this year. So I think if we as teachers get good at taking the cue from the students, and probably your whole class won't want to play the same kind of way either. So I understand there are a whole lot of issues that this is going to change in your classroom. But I agree with you. It's going to be a struggle, and I don't have it all figured out for sure. I've taught FDK, and now I'm teacher librarian and teaching grade 6. So I didn't get a lot of time to refine any skills, but I'm still willing to you know, work on this because I think it's so valuable.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, no answer. But I agree with you. I'm going to go through those same kinds of struggles and questions. Here's another reason why I think it's really important to go play-based learning. And these are the silos. And school is so siloed. We have all the different grades in their own silos. And we have all the different subjects in their own silos. And then students leave school and they realize that it's not like that. You know, you don't just get to do math and you don't just get to do science. You've got to do it all together because that's how the world is. And all those STEM challenges and STEAM challenges really highlight that it's the cross-curricular approach to learning, and really no subject area idea exists on its own. It exists because of how it relates to another discipline. And so the play-based breaks down all those barriers. You don't have to have a math class and a language class, because if you've got a restaurant happening and students are working on menus and trying to make a meal that totals, you know, whatever number range it is that the curriculum wants, then they're also writing the menus and they're learning about non-continuous text and how to build that menu so it really sends the message clearly to the people that might come to the restaurant. And then you've got your health, because you want to make sure it's a healthy restaurant. And so what kinds of things are you going to put on the menu so that people could come and eat healthily? And there's 3 subject areas that we've addressed with just a little restaurant center, because that's how the world is. It's not all in neat little subject area packages. So that's another reason why this problem-solving, play-based approach just makes so much sense. This whole notion of constructionism, and before I taught FDK, I would have said I was a constructivist. So I believed that learning happened when students brought their existing schema to the table and they had a new experience or a new idea was presented to them, and inside their head they were able to combine that existing schema with the new idea, and that's how they constructed learning. And then I started doing more reading when I was in the FDK classroom, and a man by the name of Seymour Papert talked a lot more about constructionism. And he believed in constructivism, but he said it was even more rich and robust and permanent if you looked at constructionism. So you bring your schema, you interact, a new idea comes along, and your brain is working on putting those together, and then when your hands are doing something to bring that new idea to light, to make it visible to others, that's when the really powerful learning happens. And that, to me, is play-based learning all over it. Just the hands are busy. They're building a tower, and you know that they understand symmetry. They're not just trying to use the words to tell you. They are demonstrating symmetry, and they won't forget. I had that experience today. A little girl, I run a makerspace program in my Learning Commons, and a girl in SK who had been in my class last year as a JK came in, and she was working with Connects, and she brought a snowflake, and she said, "Miss Wendy, look, symmetry." We talked about that last year when we were building towers, and she walked in and used that word, and she's really like just SK. She just turned 6. That's pretty good, long-lasting learning for that girl to know that vocabulary, and I know she knows it because of what she was able to show me that she made. Love it when that kind of stuff happens. Assessment. Just like in that block video, we know that she knows what students understand and don't understand about that geometry that was her students were working on. You can just watch their free play and pick up where they're at. And then you just insert yourself into their play and ask a question to move them to the next step. It's beautiful. You're not taking home papers and going away from the students and then coming back when the students may not remember and the feedback you give them might not be meaningful. You can do it right there and right then. And the question that I often asked was, would you consider? Would you consider using this block in your tower? Would you consider rearranging something? Would you consider spelling this, starting that word with a P? Whatever kind of outside of math, that was the question I would use to ask the students to share their thinking with me. In terms of descriptive feedback, there were often things that I worked on. Descriptive feedback was powerful. If I told them that I saw them doing something that they should repeat. If I saw them doing something that they shouldn't do anymore because it doesn't help the learning, and then it's what they should try next time, the would you consider question. And really, when I looked back at those questions, it's their strengths, it's their weaknesses, and it's their next steps. And I was able to provide them with that feedback in the moment where they were experiencing the situation, where they had the manipulatives, where they had the learning right in front of them, and then it made sense to them. And of course, we would take pictures and document the student learning and build our anchor charts and our success criteria with the photos of student work. And the students were able to talk about that because every day or after every block, we would get together and consolidate the learning. So we would do a little problem solving after, or the students would do the talking, even if it was a play time or a discovery center time, we called it, that I could highlight the learning and the students could highlight their learning, and then we would put it on the anchor chart once everybody had either experienced it firsthand or had heard about the experience. Then that item on the anchor chart made so much more sense to the students. Differentiation is, just wait. Andrea's question is about having SK students reading at certain levels. Well, I think that is probably your board, because it's not mandated across the ministry. Anybody else have ideas on that for the reading part of it?
Well, I don't think, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I don't think that, I'm not as familiar with the FTK curriculum, but I don't think anywhere in there it says they must read, or like, isn't it so many letters or whatever, but I don't think it says anything about them reading, and I think we have to wait till they're developmentally ready for that. Like, my son is SK age, and he's obsessed with spelling words and asking about words, and letters are all around him, and it's just happening naturally. We're not forcing it, and I think that we have to let it come naturally. Otherwise, if we force it and they can't do it, then that's where that whole mindset piece kind of comes into play too.
I agree with you completely. There is no level in the FDK curriculum. It's recognizing words and familiar words, and it's exhibiting reading behaviors as opposed to actually reading. If your board has a level, that's a board decision. But I'm thinking about some of the research I'm following in Finland, and I know Finland is all over the education press, and everybody wants their child to go to school in Finland. They don't do any formal language instruction until the child is 7. And they are topping everything in terms of student achievement and student performance. So I'm not sure that there's any research that says a student must be reading at this DRA level or, you know, Fountas and Pinnell by a certain age because it impacts their later achievement. I would think a love of reading and a love of books, and like you were saying, your child is, you know, so interested in spelling words and figuring it out, probably because it comes out of his play and he needs to write a menu, he needs to write the stop sign for the course that you're building, all those kinds of ideas. Yes. Mentally healthy. Wouldn't that be great to have a healthy society? I'm going to leave that idea and go back to this differentiation idea. I think I can just say it. It's so easy to differentiate the task and the resources used and the difficulty of the task and the group size. Everything can be opened in a play-based approach until you as teacher feel like you need to close it down. Maybe that was a guided math group that woman brought to the blocks. Maybe it was a very intentionally created group with some students who had the vocabulary and students that didn't have the vocabulary, and maybe she was kind of trying to build the scaffolding or support. So it wasn't always open, but it could be. And the other thing in a play-based classroom is, does everyone need to complete the same task? And maybe not. I had an experience last year where we took cuttings of plants because we were going to build a plant store, but we ran out of room in our classroom, and I wanted the plants to go somewhere else in the school. So a couple of the kids took the iPad and went trucking around the school finding the best place to grow plants because we were looking at the differences between living and non-living things. And they came back and they found and took pictures of places that had flat surfaces for the plants to sit, and they were close or fairly close to a window for light, and they were also fairly close to either a drinking fountain or a classroom tap so we could easily water these plants. The plan in my head was that everybody would go and do that task, head off and find good places. But then in our sharing circle, when the boys were telling everybody about this, everybody else already knew where good places to put the plants would be, and they understood why. Well, I need to look for places close to light, but not necessarily the bright, bright light, and close to water. So then nobody else had to do that task. They were invited to if they wanted to. I didn't tell anybody that they couldn't. But when I asked kids, well, what do plants need? They already knew because they had learned from those boys going off and figuring it out. So I like that kind of differentiation because a lot of times I think we make all our students jump through the same hoops in our classroom, and maybe that's not necessary because if one student can learn from the other student sharing, maybe they don't need to go through that hoop. They already have that learning, and you have to ask yourself, is it really that rich an experience that everybody has to do it, or did you just want to introduce those ideas into your classroom? And that's the cool thing about differentiation. The other thing, we run a program in our school called Shop with Cops, and it's for grade 7 students, and the police force and paramedics and firefighters collect money, and then they tell us how many groups of grade 7 students we could have, and every group gets one police officer, ambulance driver, or firefighter, and $100. And what our grade 7s do is they walk down to the grocery store with their emergency support person, and the challenge is to spend as much of the $100 as you possibly can without going over. And then it's really an awesome day because then we load up the fire trucks and we drive around town with sirens going and in the ambulances and everything like that, and we go over to the food bank, and it happens, we load the food bank with all this food that we've bought. So it's a really great thing. Well, last year when it was happening, our students in my class wanted to do the same thing, but we weren't allowed to, so they built their own little store, and they made prices on all the produce, and for us it was, how can you get to spend 10 cents without going over? And some of the kids just bought 10 of the 1-cent items, and others started to mess around with 5s and 3s and 2s and things like that. But it was awesome because it was differentiated and everybody was successful. Everybody hit their 10 cents, but they could do it through a different route. So it was really neat. They desperately wanted to imitate the grade 7s, and we were able to replicate that situation in our class. Then I had 2 police officers come in and visit, and they were excited, excited, excited. They all got to turn the police siren on, and we had our own little Shop with Cops day. I see a question going back to the chat. Nancy asked about the sharing and consolidation, be large group or best to do small group. That depends. I think that's a really important decision by the teacher. If everybody benefits, it should be large group. But maybe, you know, some of your class doesn't need that idea consolidated because they already have it. So for my FDK, I tried to get them sitting on the carpet as little as possible. It had to be a really meaningful reason for me to pull them all together. Otherwise, I just pulled the kids that needed to come at that time. And maybe sometimes I got it wrong and I could pull them back to see it another day. But I think whole group consolidation has to be limited because little bodies weren't made to sit still for too long. So if I was going to do that, it had to be for a really intentional purpose that was big bang for the buck. The other thing is talk. There's a quote, and I don't know who said it, and it might have been a recreation, but it said, "Learning floats on a sea of talk." And talk naturally happens. When you were telling me about problem-solving classrooms and play-based classrooms before, it was loud. There was lots of conversation. And the really great thing about the conversation is it's not always student-student conversation. It can be it's not always student-teacher conversation, which traditionally happens. It's student-student conversation in a play-based situation. It's different students talking to each other that maybe don't normally have conversations. And the great thing is the student is playing or building the structure, and they can tell you the idea that they're working towards. So going back to that idea of symmetry, I remember the girl who did it. She said, well, I'm trying to make sure that this side of the tower is the same as this side. So I find 2 blocks that are same, and I put one on the right side and one on the left side. So she already had the idea of the symmetry. She told me that, and then I just labeled it with the word symmetry. And I said, yeah, you know, that's called symmetry. And they all held on to that. So we shared that idea. Destiny was able to talk about how she wanted left side and right side to be together. And then she said, and Miss Goindy calls that symmetry. And then everybody learned this word, and it was the big buzz. So it happens so naturally in the play-based classroom. And I don't know if you're familiar, but there's some really great monographs from a few years ago now. One is called Grand Conversations in the Primary Classroom, and the other one's called Grand Conversations in the Junior Classroom. And I wouldn't get hung up on the division titles for those. They're really great tools, and they have little, the text boxes in these monographs are what I really like because I turned them all into anchor charts or sentence starters in terms of empowering kids to use appropriate language to build ideas. Because it's not just talk. You can, you know, with a bit of effort, make it really purposeful educational talk. And I find these monographs, are you familiar? Yep, I see Louise knows these monographs for sure. Rochelle's comment about talk being so good to address misconceptions. Agree, agree, agree. And these conversations can be our documentation of student learning. And I use a lot of apps like Shadow Puppet or Explain Everything, where a student takes a picture of their work or their tower or their play center or their menu or whatever it happens to be, and then they just do the audio recording. We're lucky we're a Google board, so then they just put it in their Google Drive and they share it with me. And kindergartens were doing that last year, and the grade 2s and 3s that I see in the Learning Commons this year do it. So it's really easy in terms of my collection of assessment data when I use the technology to kind of make that a lot easier for me. Crystal's talking about the Lucy West and her talk moves. Absolutely great resources if you want to work on empowering your students to have more meaningful conversations in your classroom Lucy West has great resources. Thanks, Crystal, for thinking to put those in there. And this whole thing about growth mindset, the work of Carol Dweck, and I think Susan will probably put up the link to her TED Talk, but it's the whole notion, and how many people maybe checks and X's. If you're familiar with Dweck's work on mindset, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. Lots of yeses. Okay? So if you're not familiar, I think this TED Talk will be really powerful. And it's really just a way that people see the world. A fixed mindset, in a nutshell. Well, does somebody else want to, I don't need to talk, does anybody else want to talk about growth and fixed mindset? Okay, well, I will then. A fixed mindset says you see the world like you have been given a finite set of skills, and there's some things you'll be good at and some things you'll be bad at, and really life is just about figuring out what you're good at and staying away from what you're bad at. That's an oversimplified nutshell. A growth mindset kind of believes like, I may have some skills and some weaknesses, but I can get better at both if I put in some effort and some trying and some practice and get help. And, you know, use a friend, all these kinds of things, but you're not kind of given a finite set of skills. You can learn things. I love this because I kind of panicked. I have two sons. One I think has a fixed mindset and one has a growth mindset. And so I'm kind of panicking, thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do to my older son? Because it's got to be so much better as a learner to have a growth mindset. And Dweck says even telling people that there are two mindsets helps the people with a fixed mindset start to shift towards a growth mindset. But here's the thing. When students are playing, they don't knock down a tower of blocks and say, that's it, I'm a lousy block builder, I'm never building a tower of blocks again. But they can do that for math if it's done paper pencil, and for lots of subject areas in school. They shut down at the first, or, you know, in the early defeats that they have or challenges. Video games. Students don't get through a video game the first try through, but they can play it for hours and hours and hours because it gives them feedback, and they know they'll get better and better and better until they beat all those levels. I think this, play-based really supports the growth mindset, or at least it doesn't start to pigeonhole students towards a fixed mindset, and we as teachers can start building that growth mindset. I do it a lot through picture books. There's a book called The Girl Who Doesn't Make Any Mistakes, and there's another one called A Beautiful Oops and Going Places, and I'd be happy to share these resources, these list of picture books. If you hit me up on Twitter, or I can somehow get it to you all through the OTF mailing. Just really great picture books that build students, direct students, I guess, more to a growth mindset over a fixed mindset. Okay, I'm seeing yes, please. The most magnificent thing. I just read that the other day in class. Loved it. Okay. Thanks, Susan. So Susan, will this work if I email you? Can you email everybody? Because I don't have everybody's email.
I'm just going to grab the mic. It's faster than typing it all. If you email it to me, I actually send in a document with all the links that I've been putting in the chat and that you've shared in your slideshow. And then that gets posted on the OTF website by Amy tomorrow. So if you send me that, we'll make sure that the list of books gets to be part of it. That would be wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to send you, it'll be blank. It'll be a link to a Google Doc. It'll be blank today, but I'll send it to Susan right away tonight, and then I will make sure that the list I have on my computer at school gets on that Google Doc. So when you check it the first time, it might be blank. It will be populated within a day or two, promise.
Fair enough. You've had a busy day today, so we don't want to make it any busier.
Yeah, whatever. I'm good with busy now that it's going well. Here's the other thing, engagement. You get a diamond ring if you teach through play-based. Sorry, not really. But the students love it. And we were talking earlier about classroom management. The best classroom management tool is a really powerful, engaging, learning, challenging student program. works in grade 1, it works in grade 8 for sure. The more engaged we can keep the kids. Kids are naturally curious. They're natural learners. It's when we put them in rows and we schoolify them that their behavior starts to be more challenging for us. So I think that the play-based approach actually lessens the misbehaviors or the negative behaviors that we want to avoid in our classrooms. See, I'm kind of paying attention to the chat, and I maybe don't need to put the book list out because you've got them all, but I will still do that for sure. And the engagement piece comes from this. And this is an idea that Gary Steger and Sylvia LeBeau-Martinez, they talk about this in their book, Invent to Learn. And I got this book because I was moving into the Learning Commons this year, and Invent to Learn, and the subtitle is Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom. But I wanted to do this in my Learning Commons. And this is about us being less than them. And they call it the lumped, which I have in little brackets there. Less us, more them. If students get to bring their passions and their interests into the classrooms more, they will be more engaged and the learning will be more robust. It will be deeper learning and more purposeful, and you build a community of learners. And that is maybe the best thing about this whole thing, is that the students get used to learning with each other and from each other. And I'm not going with them next year, but they're going on together as the group. And so you almost build this community of learners. And I think very quickly, you know, they feel the power of friends when they go forward and do their learning. Thanks for that link to Invent to Learn. I love this book, by the way. I think it's one of the game changers in my teaching practice, and I just got it this summer, but I really love the ideas that they talk. So I'd look for that book, if the Invent to Learn book, if it's new to you. They also talk about creation over consumption, and that's engaging for students. If students are filling in blanks or doing the work that you've already thought about, I think that's not so engaging for them. But if they get to be the creators and making their restaurant or making their racetracks or, you know, their drive-throughs or whatever it is that they're playing with, or they are engaged in the role play that you set up and have as a scenario, the engagement is there, and the off-task behaviors definitely start to decrease. And here's one. 100 Languages. 100 Languages it's a poem that's included in a book titled The 100 Languages, and this is a book that I read last year. It relates to the Reggio Emilia approach to teaching young children, and I read it last year, and I found this poem in the video form, and I feel a little bit of guilt. But I would like you to take 2 minutes to watch it. I see that Susan has put the link in the chat. Suppress the guilt that you may feel like I felt, and this is why I think we need to teach through play-based problem solving. So again, just like before, the link is in the browser, in the chat. It will open up in your own browser. Give us a check mark when you're done, about 2 minutes from now. I think maybe we missed a few of the green checks early, so if you're still watching the video, sorry I'm interrupting. I'm glad you think it's worth sharing. When I saw this is why we need to have play-based problem-solving primary classrooms, because it gives the kids a chance to use all 100 of their languages to show us their learning and to be themselves. because so many times we don't let them be themselves because we already have an idea of what needs to happen or how their learning must be so that we know that they've met the expectation. But when we do it through a problem-solving approach, it really lets them use their language that they're familiar with, and we can help them grow. And let's face it, if they really understand the concepts, when they get older, maybe in grade 3, it won't be hard for us to help them learn how to write it down and use the subject area conventions. It's really important that we let them build their understanding first and really solidify and consolidate that understanding, and then help them formalize their communication or, follow the conventions. I don't think that will be a big challenge if we're working with students that really understand the concepts that we're working towards. Anybody else want to grab the mic and reflect on that video? I agree, Linda, there needs to be a shift, and I don't know that we're going to get an explicit comment or directive or permission. I think we need to take it. We know that's how kids will learn better. If we know that, we have to do that. That's our main job, is to help kids learn. And I think that maybe, some of us might stick our necks out a little farther right now and lead the way. Somebody's going to have to lead the way. FDK teachers have started for sure. We can't let it die in grade 1 because this grade 1 students still have 100 languages and the grade 7 students still have 100 languages. It's just buried a little deeper because they've been schoolified. So I think we need to be brave and to go for it. Oral language is the key to all learning. Have to talk about it. Have to. Yeah, I maybe made that word up, schoolified, but when a little boy in grade who's 4 years old and he asks why, and then you see the same boy in grade 5 who's got his head down on his desk and is totally disengaged, I think that's schoolified, unfortunately. We didn't listen to the languages he wanted to learn in, and now he wants to opt out of the game because he's frustrated. Sarah, I agree. It absolutely needs a strong grasp of the curriculum, which kind of means we need to start asking administrators to maybe not change us from grade to grade as often. And I think if there's a good reason, they might do that. We do need to take the lead. We can do it, though. I mean, we're already a little community here. Most of us want to do this. So we just need to keep in touch and share our successes and have colleagues to lean on when the successes maybe aren't so forthcoming, and know that they'll come back if we hold on. Yeah, big ideas for sure. Focus on the overall expectations. Only 14 in math expectations when you look at the overalls. You're required to report on the overall, so 14 that you can keep going back to, and use those specific expectations as the vehicle that gets you back to those overalls. But we don't have to report on everything. It's the 14 overalls. Curriculum's pretty cyclical, though, really. So if you've got a split class, the expectations aren't so terribly different, and the students could be playing the same game, playing the same house center, playing the same store situation, and it just changes by the question that you ask them. Grade 1 is adding 2-digit numbers. Grade 2, there's some regrouping. So you just go and ask different students the different questions. The whole class doesn't know really who's in grade 1 and who's in grade 2. And let's face it, really, all classrooms are split classrooms and more than just one split. So it's even more individualized than ask the grade 1's one question and the grade 2's the other question. You're going to ask Billy the question that he needs to be asked so he can address the next step and move his next step forward. And then ask, Jane a different question because she's further ahead in the learning trajectory. And so you're going to ask her a different question, but you're going to respect every student where they're at. It will take time. We can do it, though. We can do it. the last thing, and I didn't want it to be negative, and I know, well, it's only 8:58, so if you want to type something that I won't have time to address in the chat on this screen, tweet me a question. I'll tweet you back my answer. I think I better stop because I know that Susan's got a little bit to do. There's my Twitter handle again. I promise I'll be active on it if you are asking me questions. And I can be done.
Oh, no, please don't be done, Mary Kay. Just keep going and keep going. So I would like to say thank you. I have moderated quite a number of sessions now, but this was the highlight, Mary Kay. I've been sitting on the edge of my seat all night. This was an amazing discussion. Thanks to your prompting and your provoking, which is, I'm sure, exactly what you do with your students, and you did it with us tonight. But we all were participating in that. You know, I'm supposed to be in the background, and I couldn't resist jumping in every once in a while. So thank you to all of you as well for your many comments and questions and contributions to this discussion. Such big issues, such important issues. And I totally agree with you, Mary Kay. We do need to stay connected, because a lone wolf out there doesn't make change as nicely as it can be done with a team behind you and with support of each other. So I think that is really, really important. So thank you very much. That was amazing. Right now, I have just put into the chat 3 important links. Also on this screen, those 2 orange-red links are active, so you can click on those as well. At the end of, when you log out of the session, you'll also get a prompt to do the feedback survey, and we would really ask you to do this, please, and we value your feedback. It helps to drive our programming for the following year, and we're already starting to think about next year. It also helps to drive funding, and so we really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes after the session tonight to do the feedback, and then that goes to Mary Kay as well as to the folks at OTF. Also, when you complete the survey, you have 48 hours after that to print yourself a certificate for the webinar. And I know some of you may still have a professional folder of actual paper that you would like to add this to. So that's 48 hours. The other link on the page is to future OTF Connect sessions. They continue until the end of May, Mondays to Thursdays at the same time. And there's some amazing sessions coming up. This is what's coming up in April until the end of the month. So lots of great ones. And I know that some of you do attend regularly. This certainly wasn't your first session. So we hope you'll take a look and come and join us again for some other wonderful sessions. I'm going to stop the recording momentarily, and I'll just take a minute to say again a really big thank you to Mary Kay for providing this opportunity for really important and really rich discussion. Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.